Five Rings Podcast, Road to Tokyo on the Sports Podcasting Network. Your weekly fix leading up to the 2020 Olympic Games with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramée. Follow us and listen to us live on Twitter at Five Rings Podcast and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network for more content.
And good day, good night. Welcome to the Five Rings Podcast for Tuesday, September 17th. 2019. I'm Kevin Laramée with my co-host Duane Rollins. How you doing, Duane, today?
I'm doing well on this fine Tuesday afternoon here. The fall weather is sort of beginning to kick in, which means we should start talking about the winter sports soon, Kevin. And, well, this is not a great way to start, but let's get in.
Exactly. The Road to Tokyo 2020 does bring us to winter season. Of course, we're going to cover more of the summer sports heading into next year. But this is a story we cannot go without talking about. Bobsleigh Canada and Kaillie Humphries have been in a ridiculous battle over the last few weeks. Here's two articles I want to share with you all on the CBC website that will explain the situation more, and we'll talk about it right after the two articles right here. So here we go. The investigation into Kaillie Humphries' harassment complaint against her former coach and Bobsleigh Canada has been completed with the finding that her allegations have not been substantiated, a Calgary judge heard in court Monday. Humphries, 34, is suing Bobsleigh Canada for $45 million for blocking her release from the team and breaching their contract relating to athlete and coach code of conduct. Lawyers for the athlete and Bobsleigh Canada appeared in a Calgary courtroom Monday morning for an induction hearing. The two-time Olympic gold medalist has asked the judge to order her release from this country's team, which would allow her to compete for the United States. That decision will be made Tuesday at 9 a.m. By Court of Queen's Bench Justice Charlene Anderson. We'll get to the decision later on because it has been made public earlier today. Bobsleigh Canada's lawyer argued Humphries has received 15 years' worth of mostly publicly funded training designed to create international and Olympic champions. Chowdhury said, which is a lawyer, said a written release from Bobsleigh Canada is required to prevent athletes from taking advantage of one's country's training program and competing for another. The governing body also suggested Humphries has not exhausted internal remedies and asked Anderson for a stay of proceedings, arguing the court doesn't have the jurisdiction to hear this case. Chowdhury said Humphries must take her concerns to the Sports Dispute Resolution Center of Canada. But Jeffrey Rath, Humphries' lawyer, says because her contract expired in June, those rules don't apply. Competing for the U.S. is Humphries' only option, Rath argued. Bobsleigh Canada has made it clear they don't want her to compete for them, Rath told the judge. Quickly, the two-time Olympic gold medalist is one of Canada's most decorated athletes. A year ago, Humphries filed a harassment complaint with Bobsleigh Canada, alleging verbal and mental abuse from her former coach, Todd Hayes, in the 2017-18 season. She now lives in the United States and wants to compete for that country. Duane.
Yeah, this is a lot going on with this one, and it's hard to unpack. And look, I think before we get into it, you obviously acknowledge that there's some kind of dispute here that's happening. Kaillie Humphries in some way has been made to feel uncomfortable. Whether that is legally, there's some kind of legal threshold was passed, was recently judged by a court of law to have not been the case, or at least to not have jurisdiction to make that decision. That is not to say that that her feelings in this matter are not valid to her, as they are, as anyone's are. Legal and validity and sort of ethics are different things, and they get a little gray in this particular case. But it is an interesting sort of examination of what kind of obligation already NOC has to their athlete and vice versa when there's the type of financial support and funding that goes into elite performance like we see in a program like the Bobsleigh Canada program, which it ain't cheap to be a bobsledder. Like, there's a lot of money and effort has gone into producing her gold medals, and I think Bobsleigh Canada is making the argument that although her talent is obviously a big part of it, so was the development that they invested in her, and that if she truly has not gone through the process to resolve this in its entirety, then and the coach is no longer working with her, and that would be the first step of that. $45 million lawsuit does seem to be more punitive than it would be literally what she would be losing for this, and I suspect that will not end up being anywhere close to any settlement that happens here based on the Canadian system. For those that don't know, is not at all about punitive damages. That is not something that happens up here, so that is a very large number to be thrown around. It's just a mess in a lot of ways, and it's unfortunate because this is an athlete in Kaillie Humphries who is very much one of Canada's most successful Olympians ever in her discipline, most for Canada's most successful athletes ever in her discipline in many, many ways. And for this relationship to end in this way, and I do think that this relationship is ending in this way, I don't really see a way forward. The question is whether she will get to compete this year or not whether she will compete for Canada again. I have trouble seeing that happen.
Well, yes. And the decision was made public earlier today. The judge denies Kaillie Humphries' release from Bobsleigh Canada to compete for U.S. So, 3-time Olympic medalist Kaillie Humphries has been denied release from Bobsleigh Canada by a Calgary judge who found the governing body has a discretion to decide whether to allow an athlete to compete for another country or not. She's obviously very disappointed, said Humphries' lawyer Jeffrey Rath after the decision was handed down. Court of Queen's Bench Justice Charlene Anderson ruled Humphries could have initiated a dispute resolution process earlier through Bobsleigh Canada, but said she instead chose to wait and bring this application on the eve of U.S. push trials. But Rath said Humphries, who has been living and training in San Diego, California, will still attend the U.S. push trials as a guest this week. So the decision has been handed over. She will not be able to compete for the U.S., even though she'll still do the trials later this week.
Yeah, this is going to CAS. Let's not kid ourselves. This is where this is going to end. The Court of Arbitration of Sport in Switzerland, I believe. So it's probably where that will end up ultimately. Because it just doesn't seem like there's a resolution possible here. And there's no doubt that a bit of the natural rivalry, particularly in the Olympic winter sports between the United States and Canada, where they are two of the most powerful winter sports nations in the world, and they share a border and share a lot of they share a lot of similarities. So there's a natural rivalry there, and that's probably part of this decision. Had she decided that she wanted to compete for, say, Switzerland, I'm sure it would still cause problems within Canada, Bobsleigh Canada, but there might be more likelihood that they would let her make that walk. It's unfortunate, as I said. And look, the issue that she's having, she's accusing her former coach, of emotional abuse, basically, verbal and emotional abuse. And this is I'm trying to say this delicately because I'm trying to be respectful of everyone's, emotions when something like this happens. But it is difficult for an outsider to fully appreciate what exactly they're referring to. And until you know details, and of course it's impossible to know details unless it gets into public light. Exactly. It's hard to make a judgment about it because what does that mean? Does it mean that he was yelling and that she felt threatened by that? In which case that could just be a generational difference in terms of how she views the world versus how the coach views the world. And I'm not to say that the coach shouldn't adjust his behavior to reflect the athlete he has. All coaches should do that, but it might not be something that's legally a problem, really. Certainly not $45 million worth of a problem. But had he been demeaning to her, had he made her feel worthless as a person or something like that, or had said something that was reflected her sexuality or her heritage or what have you, then obviously that's a completely different thing. And to be clear, we don't know. Exactly. And until we know that, we can't really judge either side of this. We can only say it's unfortunate that it's gotten to this point, and it's unfortunate that this athlete, who is will remain one of Canada's greatest success stories in the Olympics.
And she's one of Canada's greatest athletes and most decorated athlete ever in the Winter Olympics. And Duane, a judge did decide that there was no proof of alleged behavior from her former coach, Todd Hayes, in the 2017-18 season, because it's hard to have proof when it's arguments and people yelling at each other, or one people berating another, or using maybe indiscretional language. Those are not necessarily okay, but it's hard to have proof, and it's someone's words versus another. But at the end of the day, she did not feel supported by Bobsleigh Canada. She wants out of Bobsleigh Canada. She tries everything she could right now, but it will probably continue, and we'll probably have more on that story when it goes to the Comité Arbitral du Sport.
Yeah, just quickly, I looked up Todd Hayes to get a little bit more information on him while you were talking there. He's 50. So Kaillie Humphries is 34. So there is a Gen X to millennial kind of difference in the attitudes there, and I think that's relevant to approaches that people take when they're dealing with coach athlete relationships, and I think it's not that controversial. I don't think, at least anyway, to say in general most younger millennial athletes, and Kaillie Humphries is on the upper end of the millennial scale, but most millennial athletes, period, are more open-minded to loving, sort of emotionally supportive coaching environments, as opposed to when I grew up playing sport, having garbage pails thrown above my head was typically how we're used to motivate. Yeah.
The rah-rah. The rah-rah. But the rah-rah technique sometimes doesn't pay dividend. And I guess in this case, it's to an extreme, pushed to an extreme. And again, it's hard to think about it. But it does bring me to light this issue of an athlete competing for different countries in just Olympics back-to-back, or athletes been able to monetize. I'm not saying this is not the case with Kaillie Humphries, by the way, as I don't know, but we have seen example Qatar. It's weird how Qatar found a lot of African marathoners over the years, and they were able to naturalize them, right? A lot of sports as well. Qatar has a lot of Brazilian playing soccer right now that are Qataris now, and will be able to represent that country. So it does give me just the thought process. Is it okay? Well, what do I think about athletes changing countries to the benefit of the sports? Because we cover pro sports a lot, Duane. And pro sports, if it doesn't work out with one team, you got another team you can go to, and you got another city you can explore. But when it comes to some amateur sports or Olympic sports, that is not an option. That is not an opportunity unless you change country, you change nationality, you change passport. What is your thought on athletes changing, or just the whole process and the whole landscape of amateur athletes sometimes when they want to remove themselves from one situation and trying to seek greener pastures?
Yeah, no, and it's complicated in a lot of ways. I mean, there are people out there that believe that the Olympics, as it evolves, should just remove all references to national identity altogether. And I get that on a certain purity level, but I'm also a marketer, and I understand how taking the flags and the anthems away from the Olympics is going to take something away from the overall experience of what a marketing game. That maybe is telling that I made that slip. What an Olympic Games is, it's part of that, right? It's part of the identity politics that takes place with Kaillie Humphries. She's from here. She won this bobsled medal somehow. That's part of me. And that's a big part of why we love the games. And that's a big part of why we love sports. We attach identity and relationships with people that maybe realistically we don't have. So we sometimes struggle with the idea that they may choose to move away from that relationship because it seems like they shouldn't be able to. But this is the world, and it's a world where people can move between countries pretty freely. So I typically believe in the citizenship test for representing countries, and I would extend this to FIFA, which has a much stronger, much stricter rule for switching countries. Basically, you can't unless you can move from. For those that don't know, if there's anyone out there that doesn't, in soccer, you have to declare for a national team, and you can only ever play for that national team. It's called cap tying, right? And once you do, you're done. The only exception to that is if you are a youth national player for a national team, you can do a one-time switch to a country that you have an identity with, that you have eligibility to. The Olympics is a lot more flexible. It is more about, if you're a citizen of that country, you can represent that. I fall in that line. I believe that you should basically have the rights as an athlete to choose what country you represent. But I do believe that it is fair to the sports governing bodies that you have to make that choice at the start of the cycle. So I would believe that Kaillie Humphries, had she wished to switch to the United States, would have needed to do that within, say, 6 months of the end of Pyeongchang. And that would be the start of the next cycle, or before the start of the next season. And if she'd done that, then she would have to represent that country for the rest of that cycle, with maybe an exception put in there for extreme circumstances where there would be a governing body that would be in charge of deciding whether or not you can make that extreme switch. It's kind of where I stand. And I appreciate there will still be issues with that. There still might even be issues in this particular case with that, because it sounds like whatever she is considered to be emotional abuse was not judged. It doesn't sound like it was not judged to be such by a body, by a law. So it's complicated, Kevin. But I do ultimately tend to fall more on the athlete side on these disputes, even though it might frustrate me as a fan. And trust me, on the soccer side of things, it has frustrated me as a fan a great deal, following the Canadian national team over the years.
Owen Hargreaves.
Still see him on TV every weekend. It's like it's a reminder of your past right there.
Oh, my God. With your fake English accent.
He's been there for a while.
That's true. Maybe it's not that fake. Sorry, Owen. But no, but that's where I was thinking too, Duane, is when we have situations, and I deliberately use the Qatar example because it's for monetary reason. It's almost for propaganda reason. Qatar wants to perform well at the World Cup in 2022, so they're naturalizing a bunch of Brazilians, right? And it's almost a meme at this point. You're like, okay, you're Brazilian now, you're Qatari now. And it's streamlined to 1 month, you got your passport, you're good to go. And I'm kind of almost making fun of it, but it's just to highlight that it can become seen by fans as a mercenary when we've seen over the years athletes representing 2, 3, 4 different countries moving from one place to another, 4 different Olympics, or athletes finding ways, which I'm not necessarily judging it either, right? Because if I'm an athlete and I can make example, the Canadian national team in track and field, I'm not fast enough, but for some reason I'm fast enough to represent another country from another place on this planet, and I'm still good enough to make that Olympic team, why wouldn't I try? So it's hard for me. I can see both points, and I don't see necessarily a right or a wrong, but it is also when you start adding to the equation the use of public money of a country. So literally funds from the public taxes of this country used to training. So I understand your idea of a cycle too.
Yeah, and look, right. There's tons of examples. Mark McCoy back in the day was the hurdler for Canada that won a gold medal in the '84 and ended up representing us, Austria. I mean, Lennox Lewis representing Canada in the Olympics professionally was considered British. There are tons of examples like this.
Skaters, figure skaters, Duchesne, Paul and Isabelle Duchesne in the early 90s switched from Canadians to France to represent France in the Albertville Olympic in 1992. That's where actually she fell in, and we all know the story.
Yeah, and there's his name escapes me right now. The Canadian, he represents Canada now, so he's Canadian. 5,000 meter speed skater that won medals in Pyeongchang.
Dutch, former Dutch, yes.
Yeah, so there's tons of examples of this out here, and it goes both ways, and it kind of, it's a bit of a wash when you're talking about the entirety of whether the medals are being won or lost for your country. It's very rare that it's going to make a major difference for major countries, like in Canada in the Winter Games is very much a major player, right? So, they might lose a medal here, but they might gain one in another way. So it's a wash that way, and that shouldn't really be the issue. It's all got to be taken individually anyway. But it's, look, as I say, it's a complicated world that we live in, and what you feel is what you are. In this particular case with Kaillie Humphries, it sounds more like a comfort issue, and she's more competing for herself, which is also fine. In terms of the nationalized things, there's a final thought. Back to the soccer side of things, there was recently a Brazilian-born player that has been naturalized Chinese that is going to represent the Chinese national team moving forward, and this is causing a lot of talk in the soccer world and in China, where there's very strict definitions of what they consider Chinese to be, right? And the questions over there all revolve around, will this actually be our team if we keep naturalizing more players? Because obviously China in its professional league has a lot of Brazilians in particular, but a lot of players that are foreign that they could probably find a way to naturalize. But they're having a legitimate debate within that country of like, how many is too many? Like 1 or 2 to make us better and help our natural players, our naturally born players, our Chinese born players, become better and improve that overall. Maybe that's beneficial, but like 5 or 6, then maybe our general population no longer feels an identity with them. It's all these complicated questions that you have to sort of negotiate when you talk about these issues.
Yeah, it also goes with a society how they see other races, to use a polite term to not say something else. So, so that conversation becomes very complicated very, very quickly. But I think it was worth looking at it from that angle too, because it is something we're seeing more and more on the Olympic side is dual citizenship or athletes changing allegiance, basically. On that note, Duane, I want to bring you to the second topic of today's show, the Rugby World Cup. You know why? Because I'm getting really, really excited about September 20th. It is the beginning of the Rugby World Cup. You see the schedule on our screen here. And it is going to be an awesome competition, Duane. Canada is good. We're in Pool B. It's not going to be easy. But it is a World Cup. It is a competition. It will be on television. I'm getting excited about this Rugby World Cup that starts on September 20th with Japan facing Russia.
Yeah, and look, as rugby tries to expand its footprint around the world in all of its forms, this is just another example to try and do that. And they really do need to. They really do need to get their footprint larger so that the competitions like this become viewed and watched and cared about in places outside of the traditional rugby powers. As I said last week in a joking way, but in all truth, ice hockey could really benefit from trying to do similar things in terms of not being so comfortable in how it presents itself. This is a sport, when you're talking about ice hockey, that decided to not only when it had what they called the World Cup to eliminate a whole bunch of teams from even being able to compete, they combined them all together into one bloody mess of a thing called Team Europe that made the final.
For me, it was the North American U23 team. That was, oh my God,
such a stupid competition. But the worst thing about hockey is the people that run the sport. Anyway.
Oh yeah, don't worry though. They're all gonna die soon, so it's all good.
Anyway, and everyone loved Team under 23. Because it's not. We're getting a topic, different day. Anyway,
rugby.
Back to rugby. You just want to expand it, and you want to expand it to more places. And I think that the World Cup is obviously the center point of any cycle. And it always sneaks up on me, the Rugby World Cup, because I'm not a day in, day out rugby fan. I've recently become a fan of Rugby League, which is a different game altogether, really. But
I still don't know the difference between the two. To be fair, Duane, and maybe that's going to be the goal of the next few weeks. We'll bring someone on the show to explain the difference of the two.
Well, I can explain the difference. And Rugby League is much more. I couldn't explain it in detail. It's much. If you get 6 chances to get to get a try, basically, and then you have to kick the ball to the or you have to give the ball up to the opposition after 6 tries. But now we're getting into a really different podcast right now. It's more direct, straight ahead, harder hitting, more like NFL than rugby, which has scrums and all that sort of good stuff, which is what this one is, union. So there we go. But I become a fan of that, and I enjoy the sport, but it always sneaks up on me because it's not front and center here all the time, even with the Toronto Wolfpack, which is why I am a Rugby League fan now. It's still not front and center in the everyday consciousness of the Canadian sports fan. So this is an opportunity to expand that, and getting to watch stuff that I don't watch every day is one of the big reasons that I love Olympic sports and that I like talking about them on platforms like this.
Same for me, and the fact that it's going to be on natural television too. When I say natural television, it's TSN here in Canada. I don't know where in the rest of the world you live, but it's probably going to be on television because it's a little bit cheaper than to get the Soccer World Cup or other World Cup. So it's probably on a television screen near you, and I will watch a lot of matches. And the couple of matches that excites me already, of course, Fiji, Australia. The timings of the games are going to be either late at night or very early in the morning, Eastern time. Australia, Fiji on September 21st at 12:45 a.m. So midnight, just before 1 a.m. England, Tonga on the 22nd is going to be a good one. Ireland, Scotland, Duane, in the Rugby World Cup, September 22nd. Wales, Georgia. Wales really has a good team too. A lot of great teams. Canada will play its first game against Italy on September 26th. So we'll keep a close eye on the Rugby World Cup in the coming few weeks.
One of the longest days in my life came the day after Ireland won the Six Nations, and I happened to be in an Irish pub when it happened, if you follow what I mean. By the next day being one of the longest days of my life. And they were pouring them that day, let me tell you.
Oh my Lord, it's going to. Yeah, I hope I get a chance to watch a couple games. Probably going to go to Burgundy Lions. I figured they're going to show some games here in Montreal. Let us know as well how excited you are for the Rugby World Cup. We're going to cover it here as much as we can on a weekly show, and it'll tie us up all the way to the Track and Field World Championship, which is another event that we're covering all the way to Tokyo 2020. That's why we're the road to Tokyo 2020. New episodes every Tuesday. Anywhere you get your podcast, Five Rings Podcast. Duane, it's fun to be back talking about a lot more than just soccer.
Yeah, the athletics is really where a lot of I'm excited by that one. We'll have to figure out what our schedule looks like moving forward to that. It'll be in the Middle East, so the time zones will be a little more manageable than an Asian event, which the Rugby World Cup, of course, is. So hopefully we can maybe preview for any new listeners. We can give you a bit of a taste of our typical in-games format with the gold, silver, bronze, wood medals, and maybe even bring back the old poutine medals again too.
Ooh, yeah, I'm gonna have to do some more graphics, but yeah, we can do all this, and we can do bonus shows. But the thing is, the bonus shows will probably for Patreons only. So go to patreon.com/sportspodcastnetwork. You can help us support the show. $2 a month will give you access to Canadian Soccer Show, and $5 a month will give you access to ad-free episodes. Also, we'll have more tiers for the Five Rings Podcast in the near future, maybe with our coverage of the 2019 World Championships of Track and Field or Athletics. Which one should we use? I never know. In French, it's athlétisme. It's so easy. One term encompasses everything. Which one do you prefer? Is it track and field? Do you prefer athletics?
It's kind of like soccer and football with me. I grew up playing soccer and running track and field, but now as an adult, I watch football and athletics. But that would be more to do with my views on the world and how I view it. So, look, there's no wrong answer, though. You know, we live in a part of the world that calls it track and field, and that's fine. A lot of the world calls it athletics, and that's fine. Well, just like football and soccer or whatever you want to call it.
We have to be inclusive. And if we're pedantic, which sometimes you and I can be, here, my wife would tell you, I can be pedantic often. So when you say track and field, you're not including the marathoners. You're not including the long race walkers. So how about athletics from now on? We'll be inclusive. We'll include everyone, even the people that are doing sports outside the stadium.
This is probably where the term track and field lost some of its value, is that pedanticness that you just spoke of when they added the road racing to it. So athletics is fine. It's typically what it will be branded as internationally. So I'm good with that. But that was a tough one there's a lot going on in an athletics world championship, as you say. So certainly if we're going to do daily might be hard, but if we're going to do regular coverage of it, we're not well be behind the Patreon wall for this. Although, to be clear, during the games, during Tokyo, shows open up there.
Oh yeah, we'll have daily shows, and maybe more than one on a daily basis probably available. Duane, I want to finish the show today by talking to you about a little bit of cycling. Kevin talks cycling here on the Five Rings Podcast. This weekend, it was the two races, the only UCI World Tour races in North America, the Grand Prix of Quebec and the Grand Prix of Montreal. I had the chance, Duane, to spend Saturday at lunch and Sunday afternoon with former world champion Peter Sagan and a few of his teammates and a few other athletes. First of all, it's always a pleasure seeing cyclists in Montreal. Greg Van Avermaet has won the race in Montreal, and Michael Matthews in Quebec. But I have to say, when we talk about athletes, we talk about a lot of different reactions when you talk to athletes. Cyclists are just one of my favorite human beings to talk to in this world.
Well, yeah, it's good to hear. I mean, obviously, cycling's had its issues with its reputation. That's not entirely fair always, because there's never any universal truth to how any sport works. But it does have its challenges that way. But what they do is incredible, regardless of any issues around it. To put the amount of miles you have to put in to be competitive that way is just really an incredible sort of thing to watch. And I do love, from an Olympics perspective, how they've opened it up to the pedal sports, I'll call them, to multiple different disciplines. So you have your mountain bikers, you have your BMXers there. It really does, I think, speak to the reality of just a very That's the great thing about the Olympics in many ways. When you break it right down, there's a lot of sports that are let's call them weird, but that's fine. Weird is good. But there's also a lot of sports that are about the essence of life. And cycling really is. It's something which universal. We all know what a bike is. 98% of us have ridden one. So we all instantly get it. It's just like most of us have swam, most of us have run, most of us have done these basic sort of movement things, and we can appreciate the value and how hard it is to do what these incredible athletes do.
You're right. Racket sports and ball sports are kind of weird when you think about it. How about skating on an ice rink and hitting a little thingy that's all frozen into a net? When you think about it, all sports are pretty weird.
The entire Winter Olympics is a bit odd, but that's fine. We love it.
We'll go full circle. How about I give you a bunch of metal and I throw you down a nice freaking sled? Have fun. A nice ice toboggan. How about you slide on 3 inches of ice to save your life?
Yes, well, in Tokyo next summer, we'll be covering competitive climbing and surfing and skateboarding, which are all just kind of out there. But that's great.
Watch out for the great white shark. Oh, no, not again. We lost another medalist.
And breakdancing in Paris. We got to talk about that one day. Breakdancing's in the Olympics. It seems like it's about 25 years too late, but
and yeah, because it came and it went. Breakdancing became popular.
It's like everyone expected when they announced it. I'm very happy that there's a dancing discipline in the Olympics. I hang around with a lot of people that swing dance here in Toronto sometimes. I don't. I'm terrible at it, but I see how athletic it is, the people that are really good at it. So I appreciate the athleticism to dance and the artistry of it. But I was absolutely floored when I heard what dance they were putting in.
Yeah. No, not flamingo, not tango, not the lambada, not the tough ballet or waltz. No. Breakdancing. Come on.
We'll see. I'm looking for. I'm going to try and seek some out and watch. Trust me, we're going to have to do our previews in this. So I'm going to have to learn.
You're going to have to dive deep. But you know what that is, Duane? You know what it reminds me of? You know when your grandma buys you like a pajama for when you're like 10, and she buy you a pajama of like Ric Flair, but your Ric Flair phases ended 4 years before that. It's kind of like that. Like, oh yeah, we should get something for the kids. We should get something in the Olympics for the new generation. Yeah, breakdancing. Yeah, it's like 2 generations too late, but why not? Why not? It's a good A for effort.
Thanks, Grandma. Thank you, Grandma. Thanks. I appreciate it. All right.
And like that Ric Flair example, yeah, happened.
Fair enough.
Did not go well showing up at 12 years old with my Ric Flair jumpsuit in high school. On that note, you can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Laramée, and this show at 5 Rings Podcast. Almost every Tuesday with a new episode, and you can subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to our YouTube page, youtube.com/sportspodcast network, and our Facebook page, facebook.com/5 Rings Olympic Podcast. Until next week, as always, own your podium, folks.